Good afternoon. This is the Torah on Parashat Vayeishev, and this week's Parsha is really the beginning of the defining of the new generation. Yaakov decided to settle in Eretz Canaan, now the land of Eretz Israel, and it's really the transitional generation to where Yosef becomes effectively the new leader and his brothers. So we're again seeing a generational change. Now, it starts with mentioning that Yaakov was settling there in the land. It says, Elu Tolados Yaakov Yosef ben Sheva Esrim Shana Ro'eh Esra Shana Ro'eh Echav Betzon V'Yehu Nono B'nei Bila and B'nei Zilpa Shnevi Yavo Yosef Darav Nahahem, and he was 17, was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock, and he brought stories, his son of Zilpah, his father's wives. He used to bring evil reports about them to their father. Now, eventually, Yosef's brothers began to resent him. One of the reasons they resented him was they felt that their father was treating him as the favorite, gave him a coat of special coat. And beyond that, he had two dreams, prophetic dreams, which he then told them. And the problems with these prophetic dreams was, he said, one, that we were all binding, meaning the 12 brothers. He was given us 11 brothers. And my sheaf rose standing there. Yoshi's gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. And the brothers became extremely angry, and they hated him even more. Now the question is, why did they hate him more? Because this said they were going to be controlled by him materially. And it says he dreamt another dream related to his brothers and said, behold, the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. And he related to his father. Now this time, his father noted it, and his brothers became jealous. They didn't hate him for it. Why? Because this time, this was talking about being the chief person in terms of learning Torah, had more heavenly things. And even though they were jealous of him, it did not provide the same threat as they felt as material control. Now, his brothers were sent to farm the pasture sheep in Shechem, which has always been a place of potential. Every part of Eretz has a different potential. There was violence. And he said, I want you to go to your brothers, see how they're doing. Now, he was only supposed to go to Hebron. When they weren't there, he should have come home. Instead, he went on, and when his brothers saw him, they decided they were going to kill him, throw him into one of the pits, and then say, well, animals ate him. Ruvain said, you shouldn't throw him mortally, so you know what? They threw him in a pit full of snakes. As they said, an empty pit, which means it didn't have water, but it did have poisonous snakes, and scorpions. To see if he deserved to live or not, they were going to leave it up to Hashem to see if he was worthy of living, even though it was a miracle. It's good that he suffered and he came out unscathed. That still didn't convince him. And Midianite men and traders passed by. They drew Yosef. They were planning to sell him, but they lifted him out of the pit and sold Yosef to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. Now, they took his tunic, the special coat that Yaakov had made, and for him, and he assumed that an animal eaten him. He couldn't be consoled and wasn't for the 20 plus years until he discovered that Yosef was still alive. Because they say normally a person, when somebody dies, they'll mourn for them, and eventually the pain will become less. Since he was still alive, he can never, no matter what the family did to try to console him, he could not be consoled. Now he was sold to Potiphar, a courier of Pharaoh, the head of the butchers. Now, next chapter, Yehuda, separated from his brothers. Very interesting story. He married a woman whose name was daughter of a prominent merchant whose name was Shua. Now here it said Canaanite, but it didn't mean a Canaanite like one of the 7 Canaanite nations. It meant basically she conceived and bore a son named and another one called Onan. Now she gave a third son, Shelah, who was younger than the 2 other one, older brothers, by a substantial age. Now he took a woman named Tamar, who was, again, they said a Canaanite, but meant merchant. He had a firstborn son that died for a sin he committed. The second-born son Onan was supposed to do what's called yibum, which is going to figure when a person dies childless, his brother is supposed to marry or yibum, the second type of marriage. The living brother is supposed to marry her, and the first child is going to be named after him. Onan didn't want any part of that because if he was going to be his child, because it would be really the soul of his late brother. And he did something that was evil, as Vishem, and he also died. Now at that point, Shlah was the third son. She should have been allowed to marry. She went to Ibum. Meanwhile, she went back to his father's house, but she saw that he wasn't going to do it. And what on the surface appears a very strange incident. She dressed up as a lady of the night, and she had been, why wouldn't he give it? Because he was afraid. One of the versions is he was afraid that his third son would also die, not realizing what had really happened, because Tamar was so modest, so senua, that she wouldn't share what had happened. And she realized there was an obligation to be evil. So as I said, she dressed up as a woman of the night. She went into to where she knew Yehuda was checking the sheep, where he was going, and Hashem put an overwhelming desire on him to console with her, not knowing that it was his own daughter-in-law. She then got pregnant. She'd asked for a couple of days, since he didn't have a sheep with him for a fee. She asked him to give him his signet ring and one other thing of his that were uniquely his. And 3 months later, when she was pregnant, she was a daughter of a Kohen, a priest, so she was subject to being burned, death by burning. And she then passed on, so as not to embarrass Yehuda, passed on the things. She said, by the one who gave me these, I am become pregnant. He realized himself, and realized she was more righteous. She gave birth to 2 boys named Peretz and Zerach. In the meantime, Yosef's Yosef's owner, Potiphar's wife, became more and more interested in him. And why? Because she foresaw Ruach HaKodesh, that there was going to be a common descendant. And being a typical immoral Egyptian woman, she wanted to be with him, even though she had a husband. But again, these details did not bother Egyptian women in those days, because later on at the time of Moshe, when the 10th plague, he warned about the plague of the firstborn, and the firstborn plague has killed sometimes 10 people in the same boys in the same house, because at that time only, it not only meant the firstborn of the mother, but the firstborn of the father. And she obviously wasn't loyal to her husband. Yosef resisted. She became frustrated, accused him of trying to attack her. Her husband didn't believe it. He was put in prison because he had to do something. And then the wine servant and the other servant, bread, baker, were put in there because Pharaoh was mad at both of them. They each had a dream, and Yosef was to interpret it. He was able to interpret them both. Said one would go back in the service of Pharaoh, the wine servant, in 3 days, and the other one would be executed by Pharaoh in 3 days. Both prophecies turned dream analysis turned out to be correct. He then, and then big mistake, then said, please, twice to the wine servant, please tell Pharaoh I've been improperly imprisoned here and help me, get me out of here. The wine servant didn't want to do it, and he forgot it, and was only Mikate's beginning of next week's Parsha, in fact, its name, only after 2 years was he released from prison. It wouldn't have, for anybody else, it wouldn't have been inappropriate. But a tzaddik at Yosef's level, he shouldn't have asked for, he should have trusted Hashem would get him out of there, and he would have been out of there 2 years earlier. Now, there's 2 points I would like to speak about in this Parsha. First of all, the wording at the beginning of the Parsha is somewhat strange. After the first verse, remember this Parsha is coming off the previous one where the last chapter was the whole genealogy of Esav and his descendants. And after the first pasuk said, "Viyesh Yaakov v'Eretz v'Gorei Aviv v'Eretz Canaan," and Yaakov settled in the land of his father's sojourning in the land of Canaan. Elu Toldot Yaakov Yosef ben Sheva Esrei Shana. He was said, describes him as 70 chronicles, or it could mean generations of Yaakov. Yosef is 17, was a shepherd, and as I read before, he started telling tales about his brothers. Now, question here is a couple of questions. Why does it say Ve'elu Toledot? Because if it said Ela means these, if it says Ve'elu, it means connected to the previous pasuk. That immediate previous verse was about Yaakov settling in the land of Canaan. However, immediately before that, there was a whole paragraph, chapter, describing Esau's genealogy in great detail. And by saying, not putting a vav, they wanted to show Esau was one thing, Yosef and the future generations of the Jewish people were another. It was to make it a clear distinction. And now, it was also strange, it says, these are the chronicles of Yosef, or these are the generations of Yaakov, And it mentions Yosef. What about the other 10 brothers? No, actually 11 with Benjamin, who was a baby at the time. What about who was young at that time? What about the generation? What about the all of them? Now, there's a number of different explanations that are given to explain that. Some of them, I'm basing this on the Or HaChaim HaKodesh. One explanation that, first of all, Yosef and Yaakov were very close to one another. They had a number of things in common, that both Yosef and Yaakov were born circumcised. Like, there's 24 similarities. Another explanation that is given that he was worth 12 tribes. He was righteous. Unfortunately, because of the incident with Potiphar's wife, he was only going to have 2 tribes, which are going to be Ephraim and Manasseh. And because of that, he was told he was still worthy of it, even though he didn't ultimately only have 2 tribes, very important ones. Another explanation is that effectively they were they refer to Yaakov. They often refer to in a number of places in the Torah. It says the offspring of Yaakov, Yosef, means that all of Yaakov's offspring endured. Yosef was the one who went down to Egypt. He became the viceroy. He was the one who maintained Yaakov and his entire family and all of their children, Yaakov's grandchildren. And therefore he was going to shepherd the brothers. And that's another reason. Now the Sefer Lakutim gives a different explanation and explains there was a very negative reason. First of all, they explained that he was the Yesod, he was the essential spiritual Yesod, and the other tribes had a pagam, an impurity, a fault, because they were going to kidnap and sell their brother, and therefore he was the ikar of the generations. Therefore, he did not deserve to be mentioned, and it was only in the merit of Yaakov that Yosef, he was the essential one, and what happened is, another way of breaking it down, as explained in Sefer Lakutim, is the Yosef ben Sheva, and then it's Yud Beis Shin. It was broken down that way because it was explained that in the upper worlds in heaven, when Yosef was sold, a certain spiritual river was destroyed and dried up. And final explanation is, if you look at the age 17, Ben Yud Zion, Shana, that's the words Yud Zion equals to the word Tov. And it means that he was a tzaddik, both in the last, the down below, our world and above. And therefore there was a great punishment that for the brothers, and they became the Gam. And again, it was they who he was the one who saved the whole generation. Now, that incident is that is one explanation. Now, let's go to the whole incident with Yehuda. Now, as we know, the generation, the David Melech, and ultimately Mashiach ben David are going to come from Peretz. And it's very strange that why should somebody who is going to be the ultimate ancestor of David Melech and Mashiach come from such strange roots? That's one question. Why that particular woman? And beyond that, I mean, she was a great tzaddik. So why in this strange way where she had to dress up as a woman of the night? And as I explained before, Yehuda was pushed into it. But there's something even far more fundamental. Why did it have to go that way? And I'm going to raise another question. When it came to Yosef, let's look in the next week's Parashat Vayeishev. After 2 years, he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. He's appointed viceroy in charge of all of Egypt. Only one with more power than him was Pharaoh himself. And he's given a wife named Aznat. Now, there's two explanations of Aznat. One, she was the biological daughter of Potiphar and his wife, yet that is not exactly what you call pure roots, from which Yosef Tzaddik would have children, Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim, provided, is going to be his ultimate descendant, is Mashiach ben Ephraim, the one who's going to ingather the people. And he will actually, as explained, I'll explain another portion, will die over living waters. And after that redemption, David Melech will complete the redemption. It's going to be a spiritual one in his capacity as Mashiach. That's one source. So why would she originate? Why would this Ephraim and his ultimate descendant go from there? That's one question. Another question here is the other explanation is that was Potiphar and his wife's adopted child. Now, what was the background story on that? During the incident in last week's Parashat, Shem forced himself on Dinah, and a child resulted from that. Yaakov gave her a special medallion to protect her. She was sent down to Egypt, according to the Midrash. And there she was raised. So that's an equally strange basis for Mashiach ben Ephraim and Ephraim himself. and for a tzaddik like Yosef to have her as wife in the first place. However, let's go back to the incident viewed in tomorrow. So we have two Mashiachs coming from a very strange background. I mean, another ancestor that's going to come by Ruth is the descendant ultimately of Lot and one of his daughters, came from Moab, and Naamah, who came from the other two daughters. She was going to marry Shlomo Melech and produce the next Davidic king. And what is explained was this was a kind of relationship tomorrow with his own daughter-in-law he would never have participated in. Now, because he was righteous. However, what happened? She did it only totally Shem Shemayim, only for the sake of fulfilling, realizing that great people were going to come from her, and it had to be hidden from Yehuda, otherwise he wouldn't have done it. Now, the two souls, Peretz and Zerach, were from very pure neshamas, and under any other circumstances, Satan would have stopped it. The evil inclination, Esav's angel, would have stopped it. And the same with Mashiach ben Ephraim, he would have stopped it. Now, taking it one level deeper, certain very righteous neshamas, sparks of holiness, are trapped within the klipot. And the klipot don't want to release them because it's only from the pure kedushin spirit, neshamas, holy sparks, as the forces of evil able to, the klipot, able to survive it all, because they are the ones who power them. And they would, of course, resist having Peretz and Zerach released. However, they figured, listen, this is coming from a totally impure relationship. And therefore, since it's in this the Orach Chaim, it's also explained in Sefer Likutim, Likutim explains that they let him out because they thought this was such an impure, immoral relationship. These neshimas are totally corrupted. They're going to be corrupted by the way it occurred, and therefore we're letting him out. In fact, it will drag him down because they'd like nothing more than take righteous souls and lead them down the path of sin and destruction. And similarly, is true with Yosef. Again, the klipot released two very powerful neshamas, Ephraim and Menashe. And what are they doing? So what happened? Very simple. Again, the Sitra operative forces of evil, the klipot, never thought that Mashiach ben Ephraim could come from such roots. Therefore, and figured the same idea of corruption of those souls, so they let it out. We see here that, therefore, even though it looked very confusing and very strange, Hashem is looking at the long-range plan, and by doing this, he set the footsteps in this week's parsha for very righteous people, and ultimately Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben Ephraim. And we should realize that everything, Hashem's plan and thoughts are, it says in Psalm 92, are extremely deep, and his thoughts are the ones that triumph, and that everything that happens is moving that towards that goal of the ultimate redemption and the coming Mashiach. And we should see that in no matter how dark some things seem, it's all part of a greater plan. And we should keep that in mind in these challenging times that we're now in the midst of, whether we're in Israel or Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel. Good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.